Hello everyone, welcome back to Eng Lang Pro's YouTube channel, or a special welcome if you're here for the very first time. My name's Tori. We're a team of tutors who've done the VCE English Language course and scored a Roll 45 or above, and we're here to help you guys get the most out of the course. So today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to write a conclusion with oomph, how to write the perfect conclusion for your essay. And I thought I'd just leave the title of this page as it is because I thought it would be a cool idea for you guys to see a little bit of an insight into how things work here at Eng Lang Pro. So I've got a cute little note here from my coworker who says, think this might be a cool idea to address. In my opinion, a nice conclusion is often undervalued. It's a final thing your examiner will read. When done well, it can really ensure they mark up if undecided. So that's kind of how things work. We come up with ideas for YouTube videos, have a little note about why we think this is a good idea, but then it's free game for everyone at in the team to just grab a topic to make the video. So I will be teaching you guys this idea that my coworker has come up with. So let's get into it. A few things. No one way to skin a cat. That being said, I'm going to give you guys some ways that you can approach your conclusion. So on our ELP homepage, we have a lot of guides and templates. So if you become a student with us, you have access to a lot of these different guides, and one of them is the essay writing guide. And in the essay writing guide, we teach you guys to use the STG model. So the STG model is the same as the GST model. What does that mean? The GST model is going to be what you write in your introduction. So your introduction and conclusion are actually very, very similar, but the opposite kind of way around. So we start with a specific statement that directly addresses the prompt and answers it. Then the thesis or paragraph outline, which means what are the 3 paragraphs that you talked about. And then G, the general statement to close off your piece. So when you write your introduction, you approach it more like a GST with general statement, then paragraph outline, and then your strong conclusion to finish up your introduction. But in the conclusion, we're going to do it the other way around. Start a bit specific, get broader. So let's have a discussion about how we might approach this prompt. When interacting with others, we make deliberate language choices that reveal elements of our social and individual identities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly think about what sort of paragraphs I might do in this topic, and then we'll talk about how to write a conclusion for it. So immediately I'm thinking we can talk about something like ethnolects and how this represents, oh my gosh, representing our social in-groups with migrant groups. And we'll need some, obviously, evidence for that, but we're not going into paragraphs today, just conclusions, so that saves me a bit of hassle. Then I might talk a little bit about code switching in terms of stuff like formality, for example, which representing our social distance. So this very much depends on who we're talking to. So depending on social context. So the rapport you have with the person you're speaking to, for example. So I might talk very casually with a friend, but very formally with a teacher. So that's an example of code switching. Code switching is not always about switching entire languages. And then number 3, let's just go with, actually, we make deliberate language choices that reveal elements. Let's go a little bit, let's do something interesting. Let's talk about eSpeak and how anonymity protects us. So face needs, or actually we still use face needs when we're anonymous, but we are less worried about our image, which means we're going to have a more realistic presentation of our social and individual identity. that could be interesting. We can talk about things like harassment, slurs, like horrible things that people write online, emojis. I'll just put a smiley face. What else? Yeah, that could be really interesting. A topic that you need to be very careful about approaching to make sure you do it with justice. So that could be, I mean, it'd be really, really interesting. But anyway, with that, you guys, I mean, I recommend you take this prompt and have a go at writing paragraphs. You don't need to use my ideas, but you can if you want, and have a go, get your teacher to mark it. But how do we now approach our conclusion? So I'm going to do it with STG model first. But first, there is something that we should have done in our planning. So this is picking apart the prompt, and synonyms are something that is so useful to you guys when you're writing your introduction and conclusion, because as you guys have probably already picked up, your intros and conclusions are very similar, and you don't want to be repeating the same words all the time. You do want to be incorporating the prompt words in your essay at some point, probably once in the intro and once in the conclusion, just so your examiners are super sure that you're actually answering the prompt, which is the number one issue that students have, is actually just completely missing the point of the prompt. So what I've done is I've taken a minute to think of a few synonyms for each of the key points, the key terms in the prompt. So interacting, we've got discussing, conversing, deliberate, intentional, calculated, conscious, intended, language choices, communicative choices, linguistic decisions, and elements, factors, features, components. And we're going to use some of these in our conclusion. So what is a specific statement? This is us basically just entirely rewording the prompt and answering it. So what is our contention? And our contention, as with our brief kind of outline of our paragraphs, is yes, when interacting with others, we make deliberate language choices that reveal elements of our social and individual identities. In fact, maybe I might say something like, I mean, I could even argue that sometimes this isn't deliberate, if I wanted to talk a little bit about a rebuttal, which you should in your essays. But where were we? So specific answering of the prompt. I'm just going to say, yes, when interacting with others, we make deliberate language choices. So something like, in contemporary, you don't need to say in contemporary Australian society always. That's kind of a given, so we'll leave that out. Interlocutors make intentional linguistic decisions that represent their individual or represent their identity. Identity. Sorry, my spelling. Whether social or individual. So I've got a few words from the prompt. Interlocutors make intentional linguistic decisions that represent their identity, whether social or individual. And I'm not going to say always, but I could say often. Often make intentional linguistic decisions that represent their identity, whether social or individual, comma, rarely, or, I mean, obviously, this depends on how you're going to approach it, but interlocutors may make whether social or individual. However, this is often an unconscious behavior that behavior become habit. Interlocutors may make intentional linguistic decisions that represent their identity, whether social or individual. However, this is often an unconscious behavior that has become habit. Okay, so I mean, we will probably say this isn't deliberate, can be non-deliberate. But then this one, e-speak, you have so much time to edit your writing, so that's going to be more deliberate, I'm going to say. Cool. So that's our specific answering of the prompt. If the examiner asks us, what is your actual contention? We can say interlocutors may make intentional linguistic decisions representing their identity. However, this is often an unconscious behavior that's become habit. Now, we're going to go through and specifically mention each of our examples. So what I haven't done is actually written the essay, so we don't have our contemporary examples. But let's say, for example, I've talked about like in ethnolex, like I might have an anecdote here. And let's say I'm like Greek, Australian English. So here we're going to go whether an accidental borrowing from a first or a home language from another language in migrant households. That's one example. Or code switching, or automatic code switching between various socially distant between various socially not various socially distant, but various distance between various levels of socially distant participants, whether an accidental borrowing from another language in migrant households or automatic code switching between various levels of socially distant participants. Then I need another example. So, the last one. Speakers make... Again, I need another example. See how this list is so helpful. Unintended or unintentional changes to fit the context. However, settings such as anonymous online forums allowing time to consider linguistic choices. Have I already said linguistic choices? Linguistic decisions. Consider language choices. Allowing time to consider language choices. Present the opportunity to create one's true identity without the need to preserve their image. Present the opportunity to create one's true identity without the need to preserve their image. I think this might be a bit long, something you can actually talk about in your paragraphs, but because I haven't actually written the paragraphs, we'll leave it here so you guys have a bit of an understanding of what I'm getting at for this paragraph. So, however, settings such as an anonymous online forum, allowing time to consider language choices, present the opportunity to create one's true identity without the need to preserve their image, or without the pressure to preserve their image. Okay, and then G is our general statement. So when considering Australian society and individuals' language choices as representative of their identity, one must consider the wider context regarding other participants, anonymity. Actually, that's a bit too specific. So, must consider the wider context. And actually representative identity must consider the complex interplay between contextual factors and representative identity. We get contextual factors and whether it's conscious or not. And deliberality, that's not a word. What am I looking for? Intentionality. So this is a very, very broad sentence, right? And that's because the final sentence of our conclusion is trying to get the examiner to think, what else does the student want to tell me? Like, it's like at the end of a book, a really good book will end with the reader really thinking about what could happen next. And so we want the examiner to be thinking about the wider context and in Australia as a whole in terms of what we've just said in our essay, and think, yeah, actually, they've got these cool ideas. I want to read more about what they have to say. So when considering Australian society and individuals' language choices as representative of their identity, one must consider the complex interplay between contextual factors and intentionality. Cool. So this is our STG model. I'm now going to read you guys an already really high scoring conclusion from my colleague Sapanta for the topic, the 2022 topic, which we actually both wrote our final exams on. At times, language can disrupt, deceive, and divide. Discuss when this is true. I think this was also a discuss when this is true. So, language is rarely neutral. In contemporary Australia, it is frequently employed to deceive through abstraction, disrupt through commemorative contention, and divide through ideologically loaded reform. So this is where it's a little bit more, it's not as clear STG, but we've got language is rarely neutral, which is quite a broad statement. But then we're going to go into our specific examples. So commemorative contention, ideologically loaded reform. And then he name drops the actual examples. So whether in tech policy, which this is a meta policy, national remembrance services, or evolving legal discourse, language mediates power, perception, and belonging. So this is almost our more specific contention, but in regards to the actual examples that we used. Critical awareness of how language impacts society, grammatically and socially, remains essential to navigating its effects on unity and truth in today's Australia. So this is a really nice, broad, final sentence of your conclusion. So the sentences that I've highlighted, they're a bit of a mix between broad, specific, and the actual examples, but what Samantha's still done here is finished with a very broad, general statement at the very end of the conclusion. So what I'm saying here, it's really up to you how you approach it. I recommend the STG just to start off, because having some sort of a process that you can rely on is always good when you're in a very high pressure situation like an exam. So for me, I think I did use something very similar to the STG formula, where I just had 3 sentences in my conclusion. They were answering the contention, listing out my paragraph ideas, and then a broad statement. But this is a much higher level one where you can kind of have your creative freedom with how you want to approach your conclusion, as long as you finish off very strongly in a way that the examiner can go, okay, yes, this essay is excellent. I feel that they've concluded well. I understand exactly what was said in the essay. I'm really interested to hear about what else the student has to say. Then you've done a good conclusion, and if they're on the fence about your mark, they'll do the mark higher. So with that, this will be available for you guys. Have a look. This is all done live, so if you see a mistake, I will edit before I upload it. But yeah, always, I think this will be very, very helpful for you guys when you're writing your conclusions. But don't forget and don't underestimate the importance of your planning, including your synonyms, because we don't want to be reading the same sentence over and over. That being said, do include it at least once, just so your examiner knows that you're actually answering the prompt. So with that, I hope this is helpful for you guys. Go forth and write your many, many conclusions. Get your teachers to mark them. And all the best with your essay writing. Enjoy. See you guys later. Bye.